Thank you, Lee. It's an honor to be here. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate in this distinguished lecture series and to talk to all of you about something that I believe is probably the most important issue that we will be debating in public life over the next 5 years, which is the decision or not to continue with our standard traditional culture of free enterprise in the United States. So it's a delight to be with you. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments after I give mine, and thank you very much for taking some time. If you listen to the notorious Tea Party protesters around the United States, you'll hear a lot of talk about America's economic system, about the proper role of government, about taxes, about regulation, about the size of government. And you could be excused for believing that we were having a big argument in the United States about economics, about our economic system. I'm going to tell you over the next half hour or so that really what we're hearing is not an economic argument, it's a cultural argument. That we are in the middle of a major cultural struggle, not simply trying to sort out our economic system. And that cultural struggle that I'm going to argue that we're seeing is not the culture war of the 1990s. We are not arguing fundamentally about God and guns and gays and abortions right now. Rather, we're trying to sort out culturally whether we will continue to be a country based on the culture of free enterprise, which is to say one that has limited government, where people enjoy the rewards but face the consequences of their private actions, and that celebrates entrepreneurship, or whether or not the United States will progress to a more social democratic style of more European governance that relies on a large and growing government, a managed economy, and a very, very strong focus on economic inequality. Now, reasonable people disagree on these issues. I'm not going to make the argument, despite the fact that I have a very strong point of view, that people who disagree with me are evil or stupid, because they're not. And some of you will disagree with me today. But I hope, at very least, that our discussion today will inform, in your eyes, what's going on culturally in the debates around the United States today, that you'll understand a little bit more why people are so emotionally involved in what would have been 10 years ago relatively esoteric debates over economic policy. Here's what I'm going to argue. I'm going to argue that in the cultural struggle over free enterprise today, that it's worthy that the free enterprise culture of the United States prevail. And there are 3 reasons for this. The first thing I'm going to tell you is that the free enterprise culture in the United States, belief in free enterprise, is completely mainstream. That in point of fact, at least 70% of Americans support the cultural idea of the free enterprise system. It is truly the most mainstream idea of the American experiment. The second thing I'm going to argue is that free enterprise is about far more than money. It is not an economic alternative, but rather a moral imperative. And the reason for this is that through the patterns in which Americans are most likely to be able to earn their success, it enables most people to be happy in the United States. And I'm actually going to give you data to that effect as opposed to just arguing it philosophically. And finally, I'm going to argue that the free enterprise system is the fairest system, according to the opinions of most Americans. So I'm going to actually define what most Americans think is a fair economic system and tell you why I think that's characterized by free enterprise. In other words, free enterprise is mainstream, it leads to the greatest flourishing, and it's fair. That's what I hope to argue today. Once again, you won't all agree with me, which is the way things should be in the war of ideas, in one that's peacefully fought, as we do in the United States, but at least I hope you'll find it illuminating. Now, when I say that the United States is in a culture struggle, or even a culture war right now, actually that's provocative, but it's not my idea. That actually comes fundamentally from the President of the United States. If you go back to May 13th, 2009, which, as you'll remember, was one of the scariest times in the current financial crisis. I mean, we were, those of us who are economists were talking about real cataclysm, even beyond what we actually experienced. But on May 13th, 2009, if you were giving a commencement address to young people at a major university, an elite university, what advice would you give to graduating seniors? This is the darkest moment in the current financial crisis. Perhaps like me, you would say, go solve this crisis. Go out and be the entrepreneurs, the Americans that, like your grandfathers and their predecessors, have been the only thing that have pulled us out of any financial crisis or any economic crisis ever. Hard work, merit, and excellence among private Americans are the only thing that can solve this problem. That is a fact. Go be those people. Maybe that's what you'd say. Here's what the President of the United States, President Barack Obama, told the graduating seniors. Quote, "You're taught to chase after all the usual brass rings. You try to be on this who's who list or that top 100 list. That has been in our culture for far too long," unquote. The free enterprise culture, in his view, needs to change. Our traditional culture of free enterprise is to blame for the current crisis. It's not good for the United States. It leads to unhappiness, injustice, and unfairness, and it must change. Now, he's talking about culture here, not about money. We can pretend that we're arguing these days simply about the size of government, about the level of taxation, about the intrusion of government into private, commercial, and social life, but that's not what we're talking about. And if we pretend that, our culture will change, and our voices will not have been heard. So, here's my question. Do Americans really want a culture of free enterprise? You might be forgiven for thinking that they don't anymore. I mean, if you go back to 1950, government spending was a total of 25% of American GDP at all levels of government. Today it's 39%, and it's rising quickly. Perhaps Americans really do want to be a little French in our economic system. It looks that way. We're soaking up bigger and bigger portions of our GDP with government spending. So is that what we really want? A way to answer this question about whether or not we want free enterprise is by asking Americans themselves. So for example, the Pew Research Center, which is, as many of you know, an independent research organization that does some of the finest public opinion polling in America today. Its political orientation is slightly left of center. Asked a large group of Americans anonymously in March of 2009, do you believe that the free market system is the best system for America's economy despite severe ups and downs? That's textually the question in March of 2009. To that question, 70% of Americans said yes. Now rewind the tape to March of 2009. People didn't know if the ATM machines were going to continue working. It was a scary time in America's economy, and despite that, 70% of Americans said, yeah, but the free market economy is the best system for America's economy despite these severe ups and downs. The next summer, the Gallup polling organization in June asked a large group of Americans if they had a positive or negative image of the free enterprise system. 86% had a positive image of free enterprise. 84% had positive feelings toward entrepreneurs. 95% had a positive image of small business. 95% is an extraordinary number in public opinion poll. You can't find anything that polls at 95. Your mother doesn't poll at 95%. It's incredible. It's cultural bedrock when 95% think that something is good for our country, and that thing is small business. It's extraordinary. Now, at the same time, all the way through this crisis, public polling organizations have asked people their views on income redistribution by government, and they get exactly the opposite result. So, for example, the Ayers-McHenry polling organization in Washington, D.C., asked in the summer of 2009 for people to choose between two alternatives. Alternative number one, government policies should promote fairness by narrowing the gap between rich and poor, spreading the wealth, and making sure that economic outcomes are more equal. Option number two, government policies should promote opportunity by fostering job growth, encouraging entrepreneurs, and allowing people to keep more of what they earn. People polled in a random sample chose the second option 63% to 31%, in the middle of the worst crisis in 5 decades. Now, this even bleeds into attitudes about business, the much maligned big business, which is, and it's interesting how the results fall out. Summer of 2009, Gallup asks a large group of Americans, do you believe that the strength of America is business? To that question, 76% answered yes. But here's where it gets strange. Same poll Ask the same group of people, do you trust business? Or do you think that too much power is concentrated in the hands of business? To that, 77% also said yes. In other words, 76% of Americans think that the strength of our country comes from business, but 77% of Americans don't trust business. So I thought to myself, there's something wrong with the poll. One of the things that we know when we study public opinion polling is that about 1 in 20 well-calibrated and executed polls actually give you bogus results for lots of reasons. There are mistakes, and they're on one end or another that you can't trust. About 1 in 20 polls is what we say, and those that were conducted fairly. So I thought, I had come across one of these polls that you can't trust. It's rolling. I mean, 3/4 say this is the strength of our country, but 3/4 say, yeah, but you can't trust business. That doesn't seem to make sense. I was thinking about it as I was writing the book that we're talking about here, and I was having dinner with my family, my wife and kids, and I said, I'm getting this weird result in my research, which shows you how much fun it is to have dinner in my house. And my wife, who's very sharp about these things, she said, so what is it? And I say, 3/4 of Americans say that the strength of our country is business, but 3/4 don't trust business. That can't be right. She says, oh, that makes perfect sense. I said, how come? She said, it's just like marriage. And I thought, this is not going well, And she said, it's like, everybody loves the institution of marriage, but nobody trusts husbands, right? And which, I said, I took some umbrage at that, but I took the point, which is, Americans love business, but of course they don't trust businessmen. We're not stupid. In point of fact, there's been a lot of greed and malfeasance. And if we don't recognize that, we're living in a fantasy world. That doesn't mean that the private economy is a bad thing. To throw it all out is baby with the bathwater. In fact, all of the data say the same thing. America is a 70-30 country. About 70% of Americans believe in the culture of free enterprise, 30% don't. And those numbers have been stable for decade after decade. 70% majority versus a kind of 30% minority coalition that doesn't like the free enterprise system for a variety of reasons. And we know kind of who makes up that 30% coalition. We can talk about that later if you want. But that's a big deal because that contrasts very strongly with all of our allies. So if you ask, do you believe that the central role of the government is to redistribute funds from people who have more to people who have less? 33% of Americans will say yes. 77% of Spaniards will say yes. These are different cultures we're living in here. 33% to 77% who believe that the central role of government is to redistribute from people who have more to people who have less. And that's most vividly displayed if you look at what's going on in Europe and what's going on in America right now. Who's protesting in America versus in Europe? We just finished general strikes in Europe. We had violent protests in Greece because of the austerity that has to happen in reaction to the worst economic crisis brought on by government profligacy in 50 years. So who's protesting in Greece? The answer is union members and bureaucrats are demanding early retirement, lavish pensions, and salaries paid by their fellow citizens in the middle of the worst economic crisis in 5 decades. Why are Americans protesting today? Why are Americans marching down the street? Now, you might not really love the Tea Party protesters, but listen to what they have to say. They are protesting against exactly what the Greeks are demanding. This is really ironic. They're protesting against higher taxes, against more government intrusion, against more public sector activity in their lives, against bailouts, against apparently things that could help them to a very large extent. This is an example of American exceptionalism. In a nutshell, we might not, all of you and even me, might not like everything that we see out there, but it truly is extraordinary by international standards. It shows how America is different. So here's a big question for me. If we're a 70-30 nation, how come the 30% is in charge? And I pondered this at some length, and there really are answers to this. There are 3 big answers to why the 30% is in charge of the 70%. Despite holding different views about the cultural firmament of America. Number 1 is that the 70%, or the 30% I should say, has been in charge for a long time. The 30% didn't take over with the election of President Barack Obama. If you look back over the last 10 years, statism and redistribution have been the order of the day. This is not a Republican versus Democrat cultural struggle. This is citizens versus government cultural struggle. Under George W. Bush, government spending grew without bounds. The Department of Education grew by 54% in real terms. The largest entitlement in American history was enacted under George W. Bush, Medicare Part D. George W. Bush signed legislation containing 55,000 spending earmarks without one veto because of abusive spending. The Republicans talked a lot about free enterprise, but didn't act that way at all. And that's a point of fact. So the problem is that the 30% has been in charge for a really long time. It didn't just start now. The second thing to keep in mind is that the financial crisis provided a big game changer. The whole idea that the financial crisis was caused by Republican malfeasance or inaction, and the fact that both parties were offering the government as the solution to the problem, meant that 30% anti-free enterprise ideas could become very salient and could even win an election. That makes perfect sense. When somebody has a gun to your head, you give them your wallet. That's perfect and sensible behavior. But the biggest reason is that America simply hasn't chosen what it professes to like in public opinion surveys. It's very easy to take one little bailout. It's nice to be good to senior citizens. Let's give them their prescription drugs for free, even though they're middle-class Americans. Why don't we have another program that helps people who are economically vulnerable in our cities? Why don't we slap a few tariffs on Chinese tires because we're trying to keep a plant open, or to open up a tire plant in the United States and save a few American jobs? And all of those things seem reasonable at the margin, but you add them all up and you get the exact system that we profess to dislike, and we're on the wrong road. This is why Americans are angry with the decisions that they themselves effectively have made. So we are a 70-30 nation, and this presents certain challenges and opportunities, but we still have to ask this. Just because 70% of Americans like free enterprise and like the traditional free enterprise culture doesn't mean they're right. I can give you lots of examples of 30% opinions that were right. We go back to the pre-civil rights South in America. Less than 30% of the population believed in equal civil rights for African Americans. They were manifestly morally correct, and there's not one person in this room that does not subscribe to an opinion that was held actually by less than 20% of the population. Extraordinary. So just because they're 30% doesn't mean they're wrong about European-style social democracy for America. We got to prove that, and we can. So, how do we understand which side of the argument is right? The way to do that is by asking folks who don't like, reasonable, smart, educated folks who don't like free enterprise, what's the problem with America's free enterprise culture? And the answer always comes down to inequality. There's too much inequality in this country. Inequality has risen in this country, and that's true. It's true that economic inequality has risen. It's not true that since 1970 the poor have gotten poorer, but the poor have gotten richer much slower than the rich have gotten richer in this country. And that means that the divide between people who have a lot and people who don't have so much has grown. So what's the problem with that? And the argument is it makes us less happy and it gives us less social cohesion. It's not fair. It makes for a less just country. The data appear to sort of back this up. So if you look right now at people who make different amounts of money, you find that people who earn more than $75,000 a year are twice as likely to say they're very happy as people making less than $25,000 a year. And there are even laboratory experiments that appear to show that inequality is really bad for a society. Now, Harvard School of Public Health did an experiment with human subjects in 1995, a kind of famous experiment. Probably some of you have heard about it, in which they took human subjects and they asked them to choose between two societies. In society number one, you earn $50,000 a year and all your neighbors earn $25,000 a year. In society number two, you earn $100,000 a year, but all your neighbors earn $200,000 a year. Now, which society do you think most people wanted to belong to? Answer was society number one. 56% would choose to be actually poorer in real terms as long as they're richer than the schlub next door. And you know, it's sort of a window onto human nature. You know, when I was a kid, my dad, who had a great sense of humor, he gave me this advice. He said, "Son, it's not enough to win. Your friends have to lose too." You know. You know, and the data appear to back up this idea that, you know, we become a less happy, less just, less fair, less cohesive society when we have a whole lot of inequality. And if you subscribe to that, you take it on its face. If you just take the data as given, there are lots of things that you can do. You tax people who have more and you redistribute it according to the people who you think deserve to have more than they actually do. You have to regulate more. And fundamentally, you have to inhibit the force of inequality in our society. What is the force of inequality in our society? And we know in point of fact what it is. It is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the reason that the rich are getting richer so much faster than the poor are getting richer in America. Now, we can talk about institutional things that are real and a problem, like discrimination, but it's entrepreneurship that in the data are the engine of economic inequality in this country. If you want less inequality, you have to take less entrepreneurship. So what are you going to do? And the answer is, make sure that when we're talking about coming out of the current financial crisis, that there's no talk of corporate tax relief. We know that corporate tax relief would give us the greatest bump in job creation that we could possibly get of any policy. Yet stimulus doesn't deal with this. We make sure that we get rid of we extend tax breaks except for families making over $250,000 a year. Now that encompasses 3% of small businesses, but that also encompasses half of the job creation in small businesses. But we can't support anything that actually stimulates greater income inequality if this is the driving force behind our ideology. Now, what else can you do? And the answer is you have to reward the sector that lowers income inequality, which is the government. Government wages and government growth lower income inequality in America and every place else. And so what are we doing? In the past 12 months, we have created 86,000 new permanent federal jobs in the United States. And they're pretty good paying jobs at that. The rate of growth of jobs for the federal government that pay them more than $100,000 a year has increased by 46%. Over $150,000 has increased by 119%. Today, the average public sector job pays $71,000 a year. The average private sector job pays $40,000 a year. That's one of the ways that in America we can lower income inequality. Besides suppressing entrepreneurship, we have to reward government activity. Now, all of this is elegant and simple. The trouble is, it's not consistent with the data. If you look really at the data on what makes people flourish, what makes people happy, it has nothing to do with income inequality. To understand this, I'm going to explain it now, but to understand this, we need one concept out there, which is called earned success. Earned success is the belief that you have created value in your life or value in other people's lives around you through your own merit and hard work. People who feel that they have earned their success are happier than people who haven't. It is the central explanatory ingredient in the lives of people who are happier than those who aren't. It's an amazing thing. Every study that actually asks people about earned success neutralizes the effects of money. Now, people who feel they've earned a lot of success draw money to them, but it is the earned success and not the money that explains happiness differences between people. For example, we look at the data from the General Social Survey collected by the University of Chicago. We find that if you take people who are exactly equal demographically, the same age, same race, same religion, the same level of education, everything, and the two people both feel that they have earned a lot of success in their jobs, but one earns 8 times as much as the second, statistically they will be indistinguishable in their happiness as measured in anonymous surveys. In other words, once you control for the earned success people feel, it doesn't matter if they earn different amounts of money. Now, this of course is above the level of subsistence. We're not talking about grinding poverty and avoidable diseases and third world countries. I'm not talking about, that's a special circumstance. And if you want to talk about that later, we can, because we have the data on that too. But in America, you find that if people believe they have earned their success, they will be happy, notwithstanding how much money they make. Now that's a huge issue, because it actually illuminates 3 truths about income inequality, and it exposes some scrutiny to this whole discussion about what we should be doing in this country about the free enterprise system. Here are 3 facts about income inequality. Number 1, income inequality does not cause unhappiness. It's correlated typically with people who feel they haven't earned very much success, but it is not the income inequality which brings unhappiness to people. Fact number 2 is that income redistribution will not improve our level of flourishing above the level of subsistence. And the reason for that is it's spreading around money. It's not spreading around earned success. It's hard to spread around earned success. It's expensive, it's time consuming. We'll talk about that in a second. But just spreading around money doesn't do it. That's easy, but it's ineffective. Fact number 3 is that income redistribution, forced income redistribution, lowers the incentive for entrepreneurship, and as such, it lowers the level of earned success by citizens. That is what explains the paradox of income redistribution policies. They always promise happiness, and they always bring misery and frustration to people. You find that they're always unpopular when people understand them on their face. Why? Because they promise something that they simply can't deliver. Now, what this means to me, these facts, and these facts are based on the data, is that free enterprise, which is the system that matches people's skills with their passions, is the system which is frequently described as an economic alternative, but it isn't. It's not an economic alternative, it's a moral imperative. If the government has a responsibility, if we as citizens have a responsibility to give people the system in which they can flourish, free enterprise is a moral issue. Now, it leads to greater flourishing. It also leads to greater fairness. And the reason I say this is because when you ask Americans, what do you believe is the fairest economic system? They will say, a system that relies on hard work, merit, and excellence, and that penalizes free riding, corruption, incompetence, and laziness. Now, those are pretty tough concepts out there, and it's not very PC to talk about those things and to try to apply it to people. And believe me, I have 200 employees. So let me tell you, I don't particularly relish the idea of saying, well, you're not really earning your success because you're incompetent, lazy, and I mean, obviously those are tough conversations to apply to real people. But when you ask Americans, what's the fairest system? They say it's one that rewards merit. Why did most of your ancestors come to the United States? The answer is not that they were looking for a fair system of forced government income redistribution. The answer is they wanted a fair break to be rewarded for their merit. That's how most Americans see fairness, and as such, most Americans see free enterprise as fundamentally fair, notwithstanding what politicians typically will tell us. Now, I said that free enterprise is a moral imperative. Some of you agree with me, some of you don't. But there's another moral imperative that I think that you all will agree with, and this is something where free enterprise advocates like me typically are weak. And that is the moral imperative to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to enjoy the rewards of their earned success. So it's not enough for me to say, free enterprise is great, I'm gonna go work hard, I'm gonna earn my success, that's gonna create opportunity and growth and jobs, which I hope is true. It's also incumbent upon me to find new ways that I can help other people earn their success. What am I doing today that helps people who feel that they have been cut off from the pathways to earn success in our economy? What can I do today to make sure that is not true? To make sure that they have the same opportunities that I do. That's really time consuming and it's really expensive, but it's totally worthwhile. And as far as I'm concerned, that is the central moral imperative of a government based on the culture of free enterprise. Now, one little thing, and since we have a minute or two, I want to raise this with you. As I was going through my work on earned success, one question kept crossing my mind. Earned success is the elixir of joy. It just is. You know, everybody loves it, but maybe is unearned income kind of okay too? Right? I mean, maybe does that bring a little bit of happiness? I mean, if we got a little French, would that be okay for us? Would that make us a little happier to have a little bit more income? If you get something you didn't really earn, can't that kind of make you joyful too? And the answer is no. And I have data to prove this. I have data from lottery winners and welfare recipients and people who inherit. And those are some of the three of the most prominent areas where people have unearned income in America today. And I have data on their happiness. And it's pretty striking stuff. So let's start with lottery winners. There's a party game that you probably played where you don't know, it kind of breaks the ice. Where you go around the room and you say, if you hit the lottery, what would you do? This really is a window onto the soul. You know, and some people say, I'd quit my job and I'd travel. And some people say, you know, I'd move someplace sunny. Some people say, you know, men when they're trying to impress women, they say, I'd start a foundation, you know? And yeah, right. And I have the data on philanthropy too, and no, you wouldn't. So they never say what would really happen. Turns out we have data on lottery winners. I have data on major Powerball lottery winners. People go from nothing to $30 million overnight. What really happens to them? Sad story. You never say, you know, what would you do if you hit the lottery? You never say, well, I think I'd start with my rotten brother-in-law taking advantage of me, and then I would start an alcoholic spiral. You know, nobody ever says those things, yet those things actually are really consistent in the data. How come? How come you always hear these hard luck stories of people who get rich from the lottery? Now, it might be because these are different than you and me. You know, most of you don't play the lottery, according to the data. And people who do have different sort of pathologies, perhaps. But there's another explanation for it. There's a wonderful study from the University of Michigan that looks at lottery winners before they win, after they win immediately, and up to a year after they've won, and asks them about their flourishing, their level of life satisfaction, their optimism. And here's what they find. Find that over the first, if you hit the lottery, the data say the first 6 months would be great. The first 6 months you're really happy. It's that you're in the euphoria. You got all this new stuff. You got a new house, you have a new car, you have a new wife, you have, I mean, everything is, you know, super cool in the first 6 months. But then a cloud comes. After the first 6 months, the euphoria wears off from all this money, and you find that after 6 months, lottery winners never again achieve the level of happiness that they had before they won the lottery. How come? The answer is because they never enjoy the little things in life ever again. They never enjoy their hobbies and their pastimes and their relationships and their leisure. They just don't. It's almost as if the big experience of blasting through the lottery, it numbs you to the little things in life that really, as we all know, are the life in life. That's it. That's it forever. And they're less happy, and they're always looking for the next big hit, the next big experience. That's what leads to real social pathology. Okay. Second source of unearned income is welfare. Welfare recipients can be perfectly matched between those who are working poor and those who are non-working poor. And you find that non-working poor who are on public assistance spend 16% more of their time saying they feel very sad about their lives, correcting for all the differences in demographics. It's a very shocking result that you find that basically they're less well off under public. Now there are lots of confounding potential explanations, but it's consistent with this pattern. But let's get to people who are not poor. Lottery winners are poor, welfare recipients are poor. Let's talk about you and me. What's our lottery? And the answer is generally inheritance. So is it fun to inherit? The answer is yeah, for a while. The interesting thing is that people who inherit money derive from that money no satisfaction statistically for the rest of their lives, and those who inherit a lot of money wonder for the rest of their lives whether or not they have earned their own success. It's a curse. This has actually provided a lot, all of this study, earned success and unearned income, it's really changed the way that I talk to my kids, as you can imagine. You know, when I was originally going through the data and I was talking about this inheritance stuff, inheritance is actually bad for you. My oldest son, he said, "Dad, something's wrong with your data." I think protecting his investment, he thinks. But the truth of the matter is, never ever seek unearned income. Avoid it. Avoid it like the worst thing. When you buy a lottery ticket, the worst thing that can happen to you is that you win. That's what the data say. It's pretty ironic. Always earn everything. That's the basic lesson that we get, if you can, because unearned rewards are always a curse. That's what we find in the data. So it's not just that unearned income is kind of not, it's sort of neutral. It's bad for you. Let's get back to the 3 lessons about how all of this relates to the free enterprise system. Number 1, free enterprise is mainstream. We're a 70-30 nation. Unambiguously, this is the most mainstream concept of American in American public policy. I lead a think tank. Some of you know what the American Enterprise Institute is. It's a think tank that doesn't do work on very much on social issues. We do work on how the economy is supposed to be organized, and we have 3 mission principles: expanding liberty, increasing individual opportunity, and strengthening free enterprise. It turns out those are all 70% issues. I lead an organization that's the most mainstream public policy organization in America today, which, you know, I can't really convince the New York Times of that, but it's true according to the data. This is truly a mainstream issue. Point number 2 is that free enterprise is not just best for prosperity, but it is best for flourishing. Our current public policy direction that's moving us toward more European-style social democracy, while it may round off a lot of the edges of capitalism, it may solve certain economic problems that we see today, or not, it will make us less happy, according to the data. And finally, free enterprise, according to most Americans, you can dispute their concepts, but most Americans believe that the free enterprise system is the fairest system. You know, when the President of the United States was asked, why do you believe we should increase taxes on families making over $250,000 or above? He said, because we need more fairness in our tax code. That is to say, we need more fairness in our tax code because the top needs to be brought down to get greater income equality at this point. That's what he meant. Now, a lot of people, 30% of Americans, agree with that, but 70% don't, and 70% of Americans define fairness as being inconsistent with what the president said is fair. This is really what we're adjudicating here. 30% says fair is one thing that the 70% says is actually unfair. It's a very funny situation. Yet that's what we face. Most Americans think that free enterprise truly is the fairest system. Now, if you're a free enterprise advocate, like me, this is a frustrating time. It's full of opportunity, but you see every day you see predations from the state, and you have for a long time from Republicans and Democrats and the state in general that are taking away, that are weakening the pillars of free enterprise. It's just, you're always arguing. It's my wife says that I'm just no fun to go to parties with anymore, which is actually a compliment. It means at one point I was fun to go to parties with. But let's remember, if you do happen to agree with me, why this matters. When people in our entrepreneurial system have been allowed to keep the rewards of their earned success, that has created the incentives that quite literally has changed our world. That has created the incentives that quite literally has led to the advances of science and medicine, that has educated millions of children, and that has created a model that millions and millions of people around the world have sought and looked to when they've thrown off the shackles of their own collectivist tyrannies. People have seen you, and they've overthrown dictators to be more like you, so that they could appropriate and keep the rewards to their earned success, however they defined it. It's an expression, I believe, of true American values. To me, that's beyond dispute. And I look around and I see that there are Americans, people disagree whether or not we should, but there are Americans who are fighting and dying to share these values with people around the world. That's why I believe that at very least these values are worth fighting for in our public policy process here at home. For those of you who share this fight with me, my last word today, and to all of you for coming and sharing this time, is thank you. And I was within my allotted time. I think we're going to finish at 5 minutes to 1. So would anybody like to kick it off? Destructive criticism, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How different would this talk have been in the early 50s when the highest tax rate was over 200,000, 90%? I don't think there's a collectivist mentality moving in place in which we should probably still own the political parties as much as they do today. What was wrong then is better now.
If we go back to the 1950s, we find the origins of the American Enterprise Institute that basically said that we need to remember that the culture of free enterprise is at great peril. Now, the difference between then and now is that a lot of people, we're in very, very enormously high tax brackets, but very few of them actually paid those taxes. And part of the reason was because tax avoidance was absolutely rampant. One of the things that the predecessors, the presidents of the American Enterprise Institute from back then were talking about was, if they were giving the speech in 1950, they would say, It's absurd that we're in a system in which there's a non-trivial number of Americans who are exposed to a tax rate that's so punitive that for them to continue to be entrepreneurs in the greatest nation in the world, they have to spend a good amount of their resources to avoid taxation, which they actually were. We're in danger of going back to a system in which the most successful Americans go into a tax avoidance state, which is terrible for our economy, it's terrible for our social contract, and it actually questions the basic legitimacy of government. That's basically what they were talking about in those days. Virtually, I mean, lots of people were exposed to that tax rate and spent millions and millions of dollars to avoid it, which is probably unfortunate from everybody's point of view.
Was the amount of money spent on avoidance greater percentage-wise than today?
I don't know. That's a good question. That's a very good question. I would like to know the answer to that. One would presume that it is. One of the things that we find is when we make the tax code simpler, that you have fewer tax. I'm not talking about tax evasion. That's illegal. Tax avoidance is highly costly, and you find the tax avoidance costs go down. That's one of the reasons that sort of the accountants union always hates it when we have tax simplification, because we kind of need them less. Yet that's unambiguously a good thing for Americans. So I would suspect so, but I don't know the truth. Yes, sir. And we'll go up front. Yeah.
You mentioned one of the sources of unearned income is inheritances.
Yeah.
And one of the roles of government is to reduce opportunities for unearned income. I wonder what you think about the estate tax.
Estate tax is really interesting because what the data clearly show is that when your estate is taxed away, I should say, when you're due an inheritance but the government takes it, it doesn't hurt you. And I mean, the truth is the truth. You know, 100% estate tax is not bad for heirs, but it is bad for liberty. And liberty matters too. I've only been talking about one dimension of life satisfaction, one dimension of citizenship, one dimension of flourishing and happiness. Another is the extent to which the government is coercive with its citizens. You know, the reason that we should resist that is because liberty has value on its. The reason that I'm very dubious of estate taxes, one is they don't raise that much money, they raise a little bit of money, but the biggest reason is because taking away freedom is extremely costly in a country that's based culturally on freedom. You know, the people that really lowers happiness and life satisfaction to are people who work their whole lives, honest about it, pay their taxes, and want to dispose of it as they see fit in a free country. And they know that they simply can't because they're going to be taxed for dying. That seems unfair. Interestingly, 2/3 of Americans think that the unfairest tax in our entire tax code is the inheritance tax, and that includes a majority of the poor. Now, at one point, when I was still an academic economist, I taught at Syracuse for a long time. As an economist, I was doing a lot of work on taxes, and when I would start a new research project, I would like to go out and talk to people about my research project first. It's kind of a lost art in social sciences, talking to the humans. And I would go and I would ask people, you know, I'm going to do work on the estate tax. And I was going to see how it affected charitable giving, is what I was really interested in. I said, the estate tax, what do you think about the estate tax? And you know, people in the bottom income quartile said, I hate it, it's unfair. And I said, but don't you understand? It's good for you. It generates revenue that will be disproportionately redistributed to people in your income group. And they say, you don't understand. I don't care about efficiency. It's not fair, and it makes our country less free. In other words, people care about those things. What really matters is the happiness of the people living in a just and free country. And they believe that that particular regime that does that thing is unfair and makes them less free. And we have to, I think that we might think that they're deluded, we might like to change their views, but those in fact are people's views. Yes, sir.
John Freeborn from the biology department. Just a fact, and then I want to preamble and ask a question. The fact is that the Wealth of Nations instrument that was published in 1776, the same time as the Declaration of Independence was published. But my preamble is this, and I want to ask a question. Biological theory of evolution is exactly analogous to the free market system. Market naturally selects those businesses that survive or not. If you're in harmony with the market, you survive, just like a species in harmony with the environment. Also, creative destructivity. When you're not in harmony with the market, then you either don't survive or you redefine yourself so that you can again become in harmony with the market. But now there's a third thing. The The third thing is, when you look at the biological theory of evolution and then the free market system, there's no need for the God hypothesis. All scientists agree with it. There's no need for a moral code. There's no need for spiritual vision, you see. And that being the case, and making this connection between biological theory of evolution and the free market system, the same thing applies to the free market system. So what you get is this, and then I'll ask you your opinion. If the free market, I like the free market system. I've been a capitalist, you might say, and even though I'm a professor here, but the free market system, because I publish books and things like that, but the free market system must be incorporated into a larger vision. So if the free market system is not incorporated into a larger vision that includes morality, not necessarily religion, but includes morality, aesthetics, the idea that we all have souls and there's more to being a human than making money. Happiness is not determined by money. Unless the free market system is included in this larger vision, my statement is it's anti-democratic. The spiritual vision of democracy is you have a community and that we depend on one another. So yes, the free market system, and it degenerated, you might say, since 1776. But if you don't maintain this larger vision, then you're against democracy. So what my argument is, and then my question to you is for your response, if you're totally devoted to a free market system, you hate democracy. It will destroy democracy. You need the system to be included in a larger vision.
Thank you. To properly deal with a lot of facets to that, to properly deal with that would require sort of next year's lecture. But I will make a couple of quick points. The first is you correctly note that in 1776, The Wealth of Nations, which was the treatise laying out the entire modern understanding of microeconomics, is, free market economics was effectively organized in that volume in 1776, was preceded by the same author, by Adam Smith, 17 years earlier, with something called The Theory of Moral Sentiments in 1759, where he talked about properly ordered societies, about the value of honesty, about the value of culture and morality. He understood, by the time he got to The Wealth of Nations, that properly functioning markets with the invisible hand simply will be immediately short-circuited if people don't have a moral sense. That is canonical to the father of modern economics, that morality and culture matter. Libertarians who don't believe in culture and morality make these arguments at their peril. Because in point of fact, Adam Smith thought that, and all of the data prove that markets will fail if left in the hands of predatory actors. That's, of course, what concerns all of us. To statists and redistributionists who believe that people simply are too corrupt to possibly ever adjudicate market signals, and consequently we need the government to, in my view, treat us like children. On the other hand, many of the rest of us, including Adam Smith, and philosophers and economists down throughout history with a sophisticated understanding of how social systems work, know that the connective tissue is not the state ultimately in its most effective form, but the morality and the culture that we inculcate at the societal level as free-willed individuals in a properly ordered culture. How does that work? Well, that works in lots of ways, but it informs a big discussion, which is basically this. Let's assume we need a government, which I suspect all of us do assume. What should the government do? Friedrich von Hayek, the Nobel Prize-winning economist and the most important voice in understanding the free enterprise movement of the 20th century, said that the government has two functions. Number one is to solve and to try to sort out market failures, because markets do fail. They fail for four reasons: monopoly, externalities, things like pollution, public goods, which we want but don't have an incentive to pay for, like the army and the fire department, and what they call information asymmetries, where people actually prey on each other because they have information that the other side doesn't have. Those are actual market failures. How do we sort that out? With government and with morality, all of those things. That's one useful motivation for the existence of government. The other is setting a minimum basic standard of living for people in a civilized society. You think you're going to hear that from an advocate of free enterprise, but in point of fact, that's what Hayek said We understand that it may not be economically efficient, but it's not civilized to be stepping over children who are starving in the richest country in the world. And so we need to establish a minimum basic standard of living. That's very different than picking winners because of a political process. It's very different than social engineering. It's very different than bailing out actors who've made terrible decisions, particularly in the middle class. And that's very different than pork barrel spending. Those are the things that soak up virtually all of the debt that we're accumulating right now, and that are going to be bankrupting our children and grandchildren. All the stuff that the government shouldn't be doing. All of the things that the government should be doing is addressing the very things that you just raised, and the very things that Adam Smith raised in 1759. Without culture, we cannot function, and we do actually need an entity that helps us to express ourselves and to maintain our culture, and frequently, when markets fail, that's the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brooks. That was a stimulating and very informative talk, and thank you all for coming. And that concludes today's program. Thank you.